It's a pleasure to introduce Professor Romain Dujardin from University of Paris Pierre-Marie Curie. He's going to talk about degenerate SL2C representation and Lyapunov exponent. Please.
Thank you. So can you hear me on your? It's okay. Okay. So thanks for this invitation. So I was around for other reasons, and I sent a message to Enrique for chatting. He told me he was not here, but people could be interested by this. So sorry. Thanks for coming in such a short notice. Okay. So let me start with a kind of informal introduction. So it will be a talk about Lyapunov exponents of products of random matrices. So this will be about product of random matrices in SL2C. So let me first state a few informal things. So what is a product of random matrices in SL2C? You give yourself a finite set. You take a certain set in SL2C. Let's say it is finite. And with a probability measure on S. Then what you can do is you can pick at random elements with respect to this probability measure and start to multiply them. So you will get a product of matrices, A1, AN, where the AI are chosen IID and distributed with distribution mu. Distribution mu. Then, as I guess most of the people know in this room, there is a Lyapunov exponent associated to this, which is so you give yourself a norm on SL2C, and let's say it's a submultiplicative norm, so which satisfies norm of AB is less than norm of A, norm of B. Okay, and so you have a Lyapunov exponent, which is the limit of 1 over n times the expectation of the log of the norm of this product of matrices when n goes to infinity. So this is a number. Okay, that's a real number, non-negative number, which plays an important, which is the most important player in this theory of random products of 2x2 matrices. Okay, so there are a number of people, so I'll be more precise after that. A number of people have studied the variation of the Lyapunov exponent as a function of the measure mu. Okay, so it's a very classical topic. I will give precise statement after. And there are results about the smoothness and the continuity and many properties of this Lyapunov exponent function. And so what I want to do in this talk, so my goal in this talk is to study a situation where S, this set of matrices, goes to infinity. I will be much more precise after. So study the asymptotics of this exponent of the exponent key when S diverges in some sense, I will be precise after, in SL2C. And so it may be an unusual question, but well, I find it quite natural. And as it often happens in this field of the degenerations of representations in SL2C, the asymptotic behavior of chi will be governed by a non-Archimedean dynamical system. So the main point is that this asymptotic behavior will be governed by some non-Archimedean dynamical system under the situation that I will study. Okay, so that's for the informal introduction. So let me be more formal. So now I will give an actual introduction and state a few things. So I will give myself for the whole talk a finitely generated group. So G is a group which is finitely generated. And I will take a measure mu on the group. So that's a probability measure on the group G, which satisfies certain conditions which will allow to define the Lyapunov exponent. And the condition is this one. You assume, so I will make two assumptions on this measure mu. First assumption, call it B1, it should not be too small. So actually I ask that the support of mu generates G, generates the group G, okay? Not as a group, but as a semi-group. So that's a technical assumption which is common in this random product of matrices. And assumption B2 is an assumption on how the measure is spread on the group. So I want that the integral of the log of the length, the length function in the group should be integrable with respect to mu. Okay, so you have a finitely generated group, so you have a notion of a length. You give yourself any set of generators, okay, and you can measure the length of any word in the group. Okay, so it depends on the choice of generators, but if you change the choice, the two length functions that you get are related by positive constants. Okay, so this assumption does not depend on the choice of generators. So the basic example which you can keep in mind, so if you are not familiar with all this, you can assume for the whole talk that the group is just the free group on two generators A and B. Okay, and the measure mu is the equidistributed measure on these generators and their inverses. So it's the Dirac mass at E, A, plus Dirac mass at B, plus Dirac mass at A inverse, and B inverse. So that's the example you should keep in mind. And everything is already non-trivial in this case. Okay. So now it's an abstract group. I will map it in SL2C. So I will take a representation from G, a morphism, group morphism from G to SL2C. And there will be parameters in this story. So actually, it's not only a single representation, but it is a family of representations. So there is a parameter lambda and a group element. You associate rho lambda of G, which is just a 2x2 matrix, okay, in SL2. And so I ask that it is a morphism in the G variable and that it is holomorphic in the lambda variable. So this lambda is a complex manifold. For the moment, it can be any complex manifold, but the good example to consider is, say, the plane, okay? So lambda, for the moment, is any complex manifold. Okay, so you have a holomorphic family of representations. So it's the same as taking, so say, two matrices which depend holomorphically on a parameter. Okay, and look at the group that they generate and how it evolves. Okay, now I introduce my measure mu. Okay, measure mu is here. Now I have, I can talk about the Lyapunov exponent. So associated to this data, there is a Lyapunov exponent, chi. So definition, you have a Lyapunov exponent, so which depends on everything that have been defined so far. So it's a function of, on, say, the group G, the measure mu, the parameter lambda, and that's it. But what is important is the dependence in lambda in this talk. It is defined like this, so it is a limit of 1 over n. Maybe I'm going too fast here. Do I have enough material? Yes, I think so. 1 over n norm log of the norm of the image of Gn G1. So you take the product. Okay, let me say a word here. When you have a measure on the group, of course, you have a measure on the set of products of elements in the group. So you take the product G and G1, you take its image by rho, take the norm, and then integrate with respect to the group elements. Okay, and so when n goes to infinity, you have a limit which is the Lyapunov exponent, which was basically already defined. And you have, you know, certainly that there is a Kingman theorem, which says that you don't need to integrate here because it is an almost sure limit. So almost sure with respect to what? With respect to the product measure on the product space. So you have a set of infinite words, okay? It's a set of sequences. There is a product measure on it. And then almost surely, so for almost every omega, so omega is a sequence of group elements, okay, with respect to this measure, with respect to this product measure, well, this limit exists. So 1 over n log norm of rho g n g1 converges to the Lyapunov exponent, okay, when n goes to infinity. Okay, so you certainly know that under some assumptions, under some classical assumptions, you can prove that this Lyapunov exponent is a positive number, meaning that there is actually an actual exponential growth. So the assumption is this one. So let me state a definition. No, before my definition, I need to say something. So when you have a matrix in SL2C, let me call it this matrix A, B, C, D in SL2C, it acts on CP1 by Möbius transformations. So you can associate it to it. A transformation Z goes AZ plus B over CZ plus D, so a Möbius transformation, which acts on CP1, which is the Riemann sphere. Okay? So every 2 by 2 matrix acts on CP1. And so let me say a definition here. So a few words about this. So that's a Möbius transformation. So I will, in the talk, I will always identify a matrix and the corresponding Möbius transformation. It's a slight abuse because on the right, the group is PGL2. So there is an issue about the sign, but I forget it. Okay? So I always identify a matrix in SL2 and its action on the sphere. Okay, so remember that such a Möbius transformation, so that's a matrix gamma here, and here it's a transformation gamma of Z. So gamma is said elliptic, and in more space. So there is a classification into 3 cases. Either gamma is elliptic, meaning that it is conjugate to a rotation, I theta Z, and this is if and only if the trace, so you can read it on the trace on this matrix, the square trace of the matrix, gamma, belongs to the interval 0, 4. Okay? It is parabolic if and only if it is conjugate to Z plus 1. So it is conjugate to the translation. And if and only if the squared trace is equal to 4. So I assume that gamma is not the identity here. And the last case, gamma is said loxodromic if it is conjugate to lambda Z for some lambda different from 1. And if and only if the trace is not in this list, so the trace square of gamma does not belong to 0, 4. So why do I consider the squared trace? This is because the trace of this expression is not well defined. It is only defined up to plus minus 1. Okay, so when you take the trace, the square, there is no ambiguity. Okay, and so there is a definition here, classical definition, which is also a proposition, I would say. So I say that a group is elementary. So gamma is a subgroup of SL2C. So in all the talk, I will sometimes, when I need to consider this family of representation, I will talk about rho, the image of G. Okay, but when there are statements which depends only on the image, usually I call gamma the group. Okay, so gamma, a subgroup of SL2C, is said elementary if one of the two. There are three cases which can happen. Either it is up to conjugacy, so either it is contained in the affine group of C up to conjugacy. So what does it mean to be contained in the affine group? It means that the whole group preserves 2 points, and then you can take a Möbius transformation which maps these 2 points to 0 and infinity, and you get a subgroup of the affine group. Excuse me, 1 point. Sorry, let me come back. So if the group has a fixed point, you can always call this point infinity and say that it's a point at infinity on the Riemann sphere, and it means that the group is contained in the affine group. The second possibility is that the group fixes 2 points, so then it is contained in the set of transformation of this form up to conjugacy. So in this case, I say that the 2 points are 0 and infinity, or it is a compact group, so it is a conjugate to a subgroup of SU2, to a subgroup of SU2. Okay, so that's what an elementary group is. And the other ones are non-elementary. And there's a proposition here which characterizes non-elementary groups. So gamma is non-elementary if and only if it contains 2 loxodromic transformations. So it contains 2 loxodromic transformations with distinct fixed points, with a distinct set of fixed points. So I guess this is a picture that you already seen several times. When you have 2 loxodromic transformations in a group, up to taking iterates, you can always assume that. So when you take a loxodromic transformation, what does it do to the space? Imagine that lambda is large. It means that there is a small ball, there is a small ball centered about 0, and there is a small ball centered about infinity, so that if lambda is large, everybody outside this ball is mapped inside this one, and everybody and the inverse transformation does exactly the opposite. Okay? So every point outside a certain small ball is mapped to another small ball, and the opposite. And so when you have 2 loxodromic transformations with distinct fixed point, you have a picture like this, and you certainly know that this creates complicated dynamics. You see a limit counter set and complicated dynamics happening. Okay? So non-elementary groups are exactly the groups that generate complicated dynamics. Another terminology that you may know, so for people working in the cocycle theory, there is this pinching and twisting terminology. So if and only if gamma is pinching and twisting, I think this is the Viana terminology, pinching and twisting. Okay, so that's the cocycle terminology. And there is also the random product of matrices terminology. So we say that gamma is proximal and strongly reducible. Okay, that's always the same thing. And so there is this important Fürstenberg theorem. So under all the assumptions before, the assumptions on the measure, so if, say, G mu is as before, so it satisfies B1 and B2, and if the image of G under the representation is non-elementary, then the Lyapunov exponent is positive. Okay, so that's the Fürstenberg theorem. Okay, now what about the variation? So now I want to study the function. So my goal, as I said, is to study the function lambda maps to, so key of lambda, which is the representation, the Lyapunov exponent of the subgroup rho lambda of G with respect to the measure image by mu by rho lambda. Okay? I want to study the properties of this function. So there are already a number of known results about this. So first result, so that's again due to Fürstenberg. It follows from the proof, actually. If you take lambda, if at lambda naught, if rho lambda naught of G is non-elementary, then the Lyapunov exponent function is continuous at this parameter. Is continuous at lambda naught. Okay, so I will explain why in a moment. There is so that's a result from the 60s, say. So now there is a more recent result, which is due to Boker and Viana, and which was generalized in higher dimensions. So this is, of course, there is a theory for this for n by n matrices. It's not restricted to 2 by 2. And most of these results are valid for the general case. The Boker-Viana theorem is only a 2-dimensional theorem. It was generalized by Avila, Eskin, and Viana to all dimensions. Actually, the function lambda is continuous everywhere. So chi is continuous at all parameters. Is continuous at all parameters. Non-elementary or not. Okay? There may be, so here I did not check, there may be a slightly stronger assumption on the moments of mu, but it's let's say it's a detail. Okay? There is another result, which I will not be using here. There is a general fact that this function, so this is true for, all this has nothing to do with the complex numbers. This is true for real numbers. The last statement is specific to SL2C. So that's a subharmonic function. Okay, so that's a complex statement. And actually, in collaboration with De Rouen, in collaboration with Bertrand de Rouen, we have proved that it is harmonic if and only if. So I don't say too much about this because I will not use it. But if you find an open set where the function is harmonic, then the family of representation is structurally stable. So if and only if it is structurally stable. And actually, if and only if a certain form of hyperbolicity holds. Okay, so I will not use this in the talk. Okay. So maybe why is this continuous? So what is the proof? What is the proof of the Fürstenberg theorem? So the proof is based on the study of the random dynamical system induced by the product of matrices on P1. So actually there is a certain Markov operator on P1, or a random dynamical system on P1. Okay, so you have a random product of matrices. It acts randomly on P1. You have a Markov chain, which acts on probability measures. So it acts, and so there is an action, a Markov operator, which acts on the space of probability measures of P1 to itself by the usual operation. You take a probability measure M, you push it by the various elements of the group, and you integrate. So you take the image of M by all the elements, and you integrate with respect to G. Okay? And so that's a Markov operator. Call it as you like, convolution operator. And the Fürstenberg theorem is based on the fact that this operator has a unique fixed point. So under the assumptions that if under this assumption that rho lambda naught is non-elementary, then there is a unique fixed point under this operator. Yes?
Just a little comment about the Bokoviana theorem. We also extend to prove that we have Holder continuity at every point with single Lyapunov X spectrum.
Without further moment condition?
No. The same condition there, but asking that you have simplicity, so we prove Holder continuity.
Okay. Okay, thanks. So Furstenberg says that there exists a unique fixed point, which I call nu, which is invariant under this operator. So it's a unique stationary measure. So that's a unique stationary measure. So that's the first point. And the second point, so it's not obvious. I will not explain how you prove it. And the second point is that you can express the Lyapunov exponent as with a formula using the stationary measure. The Lyapunov exponent of rho lambda. So it's the only formula that you can cook up with all the data you have. You take the following. So when you take a vector v, when you take an element v in P1, you can lift it to a vector v in C2, and I choose the lift to have norm 1, such that the norm of v is equal to 1. So it's not unique, but it's not important here. And the formula is like this. You take the log of the image of this vector v by the transformation rho of g, and you integrate with respect to the probability measure nu and with respect to the probability measure mu on g. So that's the only formula that you can write, and actually this number is the Lyapunov exponent. Okay, so now assume if rho lambda naught is non-elementary. So as I said, there is a unique stationary measure. Okay, so if you assume you take a family of non-elementary representations, then the stationary measures must move continuously. Okay, so if, say, for every lambda, rho lambda is non-elementary, then lambda, the stationary measure is continuous for the weak topology because it's unique. You have no choice. Okay, a limit of stationary measures must be stationary. And since you are integrating a continuous function, well, you get a continuous formula. Okay, and so get the continuity of chi by the formula here. And the fact that you are integrating here a continuous function. Okay, that's a proof of the Furstenberg theorem. Now, let's go to our results. Okay, so as I said, I want to study what happens when the parameter goes to infinity. So it will actually go to infinity in a very specific way. Actually, I will assume that I work on a one-dimensional family. So from now on, lambda will be one-dimensional, holomorphic family. And I want a parameter going to infinity, so it is, so let's say it's the complement of the disk in the plane. And so I will just put lambda equals 1 over t, so that now infinity is at 0. Okay? So actually I will work, so the interesting parameter is when t goes to 0. So actually my setting, so I change notation a little bit. I will take chi t for t parameterized by the punctured unit disk. Okay, so that's a holomorphic family of representations And I will not assume any way of going to infinity. I want that there is a meromorphic singularity at the origin. So with meromorphic extension at 0. So I don't accept transcendental singularities. Meromorphic extension at 0. So it just means that for every element of the group, you have a certain matrix with holomorphic coefficients. And these holomorphic coefficients have a meromorphic extension at the origin. Okay, so you can easily cook up examples like, I don't know, that's an example, of course, 0, t over t plus 1, t plus 1 over t. So here I get determinant equals 1, and 3 plus 2 over t plus minus 4 over t squared. You can imagine, of course, any formula. That's a formula. Okay? And you imagine a group which is made of matrices like this. So that's my setting. And I will denote by M. So I will denote by M. This is a set of holomorphic functions in the puncture disk with meromorphic extension at the origin. So it is the set of holomorphic functions in the disk, in the puncture disk, with meromorphic extension at 0. That's how. And I will also denote by O sometimes just the set of holomorphic functions in the disk. Okay, so the theorem is like this. Oh, I should have said before, but now I say it. Everything is in collaboration with Favre, with Charles Favre. I should have said it before. Okay, so what is the theorem? So under all the assumptions before, so let me remind them. I have a finitely generating G endowed with some measure mu, which satisfies my assumptions B1, which was that the support of mu generates G, and a slightly stronger assumption B2 prime, which is that the integral of the length of G is integrable, but I need a small delta here. So for some delta, you can integrate the length to the power 1 plus delta. Okay, so it's slightly stronger than the other one. Then there exists a certain number C, which is non-negative for the moment, such that, so in my setting here, the Lyapunov exponent of the family grows like constant log t. Okay, so that 1 over log t, so I put t inverse here to have a positive number, times the Lyapunov exponent converges to C. So that's the first version of the main result. Okay, so there exists a certain asymptotic of the Lyapunov exponent, which was absolutely not obvious from the beginning. Okay. So, what is C? So what is, I want to advertise a fact. So what is this C? C is a non-Archimedean Lyapunov exponent. So C is the non-Archimedean Lyapunov exponent. What does it mean? So I have here a certain ring of meromorphic functions, and there is a non-Archimedean norm on it. So if f is a function in my ring M, it has a certain order of vanishing at the origin. Okay, so you can define the order of vanishing of f at t equals 0. Okay, so that's an integer. That's an integer which is negative if and only if there is a pole. Okay, which is negative when f has a pole at the origin. Okay, and so I can do a norm with this. I will define the non-Archimedean norm of f. Say, no, let me just put one bar. The non-Archimedean is just the exponential of this order. Exponential of minus the order at 0 of f. So that's a norm on this ring here, which is non-Archimedean. So the norm of f plus g is the maximum of the norm f and norm g. That's a non-Archimedean norm. Okay, and now I can do the same with matrices. Now if A is a matrix in SL2 of M, so a matrix of this form here, I can define the non-Archimedean norm of A as the minimum of the orders of the aij's at 0. Okay? It is a certain norm on what? It is a norm on SL2M, which is a set of 2 by 2 matrices of determinant 1 with coefficients in this ring of holomorphic functions. Okay, now what I did, these explanations about the Kingman theorem, they work exactly the same here. Okay, so by the Kingman theorem, so you have this subadditivity, submultiplicativity. Okay, so you have a submultiplicative cocycle or subadditive cocycle, and so you can apply Kingman. And so there exists a certain number, which I will call non-Archimedean Lyapunov exponent, which is the limit, which is the almost sure limit, as n goes to infinity, of 1 over n log norm of this product of rho of, okay, I'm going too fast here. Before writing the formula, I should say something. So this data of a holomorphic family of representations, yes?
Sorry, so the norm of a matrix is an integer?
Yes, that's an integer. That's an integer. Of course, I will take 1 over n, so the Lyapunov exponent it's not an integer. Okay? Okay, so just I wanted to say that the data of this family of holomorphic family of representations is the same as the, oh, that's not a chi, that was a rho here. Okay, is the same as a single representation in SL2 of M. Okay, so it is the same as rho, a representation from G into SL2M. Okay, one single representation with value in SL2M corresponds to a family, a holomorphic family of representations. Okay, so it gives a meaning to this. I can take the random walk in my group, Gn, G1, take its value by this representation with value in SL2M. Okay, so this is the product of n matrices of this form. Okay, and I take 1 over n log of norm, so non-Archimedean norm, and it converges just by subadditivity to a number which is the non-Archimedean Lyapunov exponent. And this non-Archimedean Lyapunov exponent is the value of the limit here. Okay? So, of course, well, it may seem a little strange at first sight, but it is completely obvious for one matrix, for instance. When you look at this matrix, and you take the log of the norm of this matrix when t goes to 0. So let me take this one. If you take the classical norm, so there are two norms here involved. There is a, where is it? Okay, you have the classical norm on matrices. When you take the log of this, you divide by log t. What happens? But clearly, you have a dominant term, which is this t square here. And so you have the log of this norm is like 2 log t. Okay, and so this converges to 2. Okay, maybe there is a minus somewhere, so it's no, here the sign is good. Okay, so for n2 is exactly the non-Archimedean norm of my matrix. Okay, so for a single matrix, this is obvious, right? The point here is that we are doing it for a Lyapunov exponent, and there is a limit involved. Okay, it's exactly like in the Furstenberg theorem. You have to exchange two limits. So it's exactly what happens here. So what this theorem says is that you can exchange the limit in n and the limit in t, exactly like in this Furstenberg continuity theorem, where you can exchange the limit in n and the limit in t, right? Okay, so that's our theorem. Now, actually, this theorem is the union of two slightly different things. So actually, there are two cases in this theorem.
Sorry.
Yes?
What happens in the external case when delta is equal to 0?
I will explain just in a second. This is what I'm going to say here. So there are two cases. You have the elementary cases. So you see there is no non-elementary assumption. Well, there is no assumption here at all. Okay? And so there are two cases, elementary and non-elementary. And actually the elementary case is easy, but it is exactly this case which requires the delta. So it requires delta positive, but it is easy. Okay? And there is the non-elementary case which works with delta equals 0, but it is more complicated. So let me say what elementary means here. So definition. So I take a representation from G into SL2 of the ring M. What does it mean to be elementary? Is elementary if one of three cases happen. So there are, in the classical case, you have three cases: affine, 0 and infinity fixed, and compact. So here it's basically the same. So either it is conjugate, conjugate in this group to a representation of the form A in the affine group, ATZ plus BT. Okay, so that's just an affine a family of affine transformation depending holomorphically on a parameter. Or it is conjugated, so that's the affine group of M. Okay. Or same second case, it is conjugate to a representation which fixes 0 and infinity. So transformation of this form with lambda in M. And the last case, which plays the role of the compact case, it is when it is holomorphic at the origin. Or it is conjugate to a representation which actually extends holomorphically at the origin in SL2O, which is somehow the compact case. So you see, for instance, if the representation is holomorphic at the origin, then by the Furstenberg theorem or the Boker-Viana theorem, the Lyapunov exponent has a finite limit. So it is exactly the case that 1 over log t which goes to infinity, so the non-Archimedean Lyapunov exponent is 0 in this case. And well, if it is in SL2O, as I said somewhere, it is exactly the case that this norm is equal to 1. Okay, because there is no pole. And so in the elementary case, it is the result is easy. Okay, you just you can do it by hand. It's not difficult. Okay, so it's not like the Boker-Viana theorem. In the Boker-Viana theorem, what is delicate is that you could take non-elementary representations going to an elementary one. Here, what I define a representation is elementary if it is of this form for every parameter. Okay, so this is really easy. So now the non-easy case is the non-elementary case. So let me state again the theorem with additional information. So that was theorem 1. So the second form of the theorem, so it's a precise form. So if, so under the same assumptions, okay, if you take a non-elementary representation of G in SL2M, now I assume that it is non-elementary, which is the generic case, and assume assumptions B1 and B2, so there is no delta here. Then, so actually you have two informations. I should have said something before. Of course, I forget. Let me write it here. So there's a fact. There is a lemma. There's a lemma here, which is that if you take a non-elementary representation, so of course when you take this such a family of representations, for every t you have a representation in SL2C, okay? And then the classical representations are non-elementary for small t. So there exists a certain delta, which has nothing to do with the other one, epsilon, say, such that for every t between 0 and epsilon, the representation rho t, which is a representation from G into SL to C, is non-elementary. Okay, so if the non-Archimedean representation is non-elementary, then the classical ones are non-elementary for every small t. So in particular, you see that for this representation, you have a unique stationary measure, nu t. And the first conclusion of the theorem is that this family of non-elementary, stationary measure converges to some measure nu naught on P1, which is atomic, always. So these measures are never atomic, otherwise the representation would have would be non-irreducible, would have a finite orbit. So these stationary measures of Furstenberg, they are never atomic, but at the limit you always get an atomic measure, maybe with an infinite number of atoms. And that's the first conclusion. And second conclusion, the Lyapunov exponent, so you have an asymptotic of this Lyapunov exponent, converges to the non-Archimedean one, so it is the same result as before, same assertion as before, but now this non-Archimedean Lyapunov exponent is positive too. So you actually have a blow-up of the Lyapunov exponent like constant log t, where the constant is non-zero. Okay? Okay, so that's the main theorem. So it does not come out of nowhere. So it was actually inspired, I should say, by results that already exist. So there are two sources of inspiration for this. So one source of inspiration is the people who have studied actually degenerations of families of representation in SL2C. So they were motivated by three-dimensional geometry. So these people are Kühler, Morgan, Shalon. So people working in topology in the beginning of the 80s who studied how a meromorphic family of SL2C representations can converge in a sense. I will be more precise. Well, I won't never be. Can converge to a non-Archimedean object. And there is also another source of inspiration. So there are, as I said, for every random product of matrices in SL2C defines a holomorphic dynamical system on P1. Okay? And there are people who have studied how meromorphic families of holomorphic dynamical system, classical, non-random, classical dynamical system can degenerate. So these people are people like Kiwi, Jeanne Kiwi, or Laura de Marco, or Favre too. And so they proved similar results for family of dynamical systems generated by rational functions on P1. Okay, and then the measure is the maximal entropy measure. Okay, so let me explain a little bit how this works. So first, to understand what happens here, you first need to understand how a Möbius transformation degenerates. So that's, I don't know, section 2. So how a single Möbius transformation can degenerate. Okay, so let me take gamma t. So that's an element of SL2M. Okay, and I want to understand what happens when t goes to 0. So that's the first case. First case, when the non-Archimedean of norm of gamma t is less than 1, okay, which corresponds to the order at the origin positive of gamma t is positive, then there is no degeneracy. So actually when it is less than 1, it is equal to 1. This is exactly as in SL2. So actually, so it is equal to 1. Okay. All coefficients cannot vanish because the determinant is 1. Okay. Then it extends holomorphically at the origin. holomorphically at the origin. So actually it belongs to SL2 of O. So there is no degeneracy. And the next case is when there is a degeneracy. What happens in this case? So to understand what happens, you have to think about it geometrically. So second case, when the norm is bigger than 1. So then what you do is you look at the fibered action on this gamma t on D cross P1. So you have a gamma going from D cross P1, say D star cross P1 to itself, and Tz goes to T gamma T of Z. So that's just a trivial fibered dynamical system. Okay, so that's a biholomorphism. For every fiber, you have a Möbius transformation. And the question is what happens at the central fiber here. So we have a fiber 0. So this D cross P1, I will denote it by X. Okay, so you have the fiber X0, which is 0 times C, times P1. What happens to this fiber? Well, all the fiber is contracted to 1 point, except for 1 point. So what happens in these fibers? That there are 2 points. You have a certain attracting point here and a repelling point here, maybe the same, such that, so if there is a degeneracy, so there exists an attracting point of gamma and a repelling point of gamma, such that gamma, so this gamma extends as a bimeromorphic transformation to X. So it extends as a birational transformation. It extends to X, actually, as a function which will contract the fiber here, except 1 point. So that gamma maps X naught minus the repelling point to the attracting point. And gamma inverse does the opposite. So remember these small balls associated to the loxodromic transformation. Okay, when you make this transformation degenerate, the balls shrink to points. So you will map everything but a point to a point. And that's the only way of degenerating for a Möbius transformation. Okay? It is possible, so remark, it is possible that the attracting point is equal to the repelling point. For instance, if you look at the transformation z plus 1 over t, when t goes to 0, it's z plus infinity. So it maps everybody to infinity, but the inverse is z minus infinity, which maps everybody to infinity too. Okay? So that's a case where you have an attracting point equal repelling point. So now, maybe let me give an example of what can happen for the theorem. So let me take my Schottky group, which I discussed before. So imagine you have two loxodromic transformations like this. So you have A mapping everybody here, A inverse maps everybody but this ball. So that's the attracting ball of A. That's the repelling ball of A. And you have the attracting ball of B. So everybody goes here. And repelling ball of B here. That's B inverse, repelling ball of B. Okay? So that's a so-called Schottky group. And when you have a group like this, so you can look at the image. So when you iterate A 2 times, what happens? You see the image of this ball under A is a smaller ball here, but you also have the image of this and the image of that. So you see a counter set appearing. When you iterate this, there is a certain limit counter set. Okay, which you can see easily, and if so, that's a group generated by two transformations. So here I'm working with the free group and the balance measure on the generators, delta A plus and so on. What is the stationary measure here? It is the balanced measure on the counter set, which gives the same mass to all of these small balls. Okay, so nu is the balanced measure on the counter set. So now let me add parameters. So I have AT, BT, AT, BT. Okay, and things are degenerating when t goes to 0. So what happens is that first case, so when t, so case 1, for instance, when t goes to 0, A and B degenerate at the same speed somehow. What happens? Well, all these balls shrink to points. So the measure nu becomes just a sum of 4 Dirac masses, right? So when t goes to 0, A and B and BT degenerate. And so say at the same speed. So it's not very precise here. So what you get nu t converges to 4 Dirac points, 4 Dirac masses of the same mass. Okay? But you can also imagine that, for instance, AT degenerates, but BT not. Okay, you can take two transformations. One is degenerating and the other one is not degenerating. What happens? Then these two balls here shrink to points, but B is still a Möbius transformation. So the stationary measure, you will get two atoms of mass 1, 4, and their orbit under B, which is still a classical Möbius transformation. So you get two big atoms of mass, say, 1, 4, and the image of these atoms under B. So your asymptotic measure will be concentrated on this infinite set. And you can imagine plenty of other situations. For instance, you could imagine that when this is degenerating, so you see B inverse shrinks. So when this is degenerating, you have, say, 4 balls like that. B inverse blow up this ball to a very large set. Imagine that now at the limit there is a collision between two of these balls. So you have A which shrinks everything to a point, but B inverse shrinks, blows up everything. You could imagine that at the limit you have complicated things, maybe non-atomic measures, for instance. Okay? For instance, you always have compositions of the form A inverse, which map to classical Möbius transformations. Not everybody in the group is degenerating. You have plenty of words which give rise to non-degenerating elements. Okay? So you can imagine plenty of different situations, and the statement says that in all the cases, the limiting measure is atomic, always. Okay? Okay, so you see that it can become pretty messy from the algebraic point of view. Okay, you have this thing blowing down to points and then blowing up. So you need to find a formalism which is able to deal with all these situations. So what is the formalism that we use? So we use Berkovich spaces. So there is that's section 3, non-Archimedean formalism. Okay, so as I said, there is this ring M. So for various reasons, it is useful to work with a field, and with a field which is complete. So we embed it into a certain field L, which is the completion of the fraction field of M for the non-Archimedean measure. So it is the field of a formal Puiseux series, formal Laurent series. So series of this form, where J is bigger than something. Okay? And this series are formal. We don't mind about convergence. When you make completions with respect to a non-Archimedean absolute value, you lose the convergence. Okay, so that's now a field. Okay, and so SL2 of M is contained in SL2 of this field. Now, at some point we have to redo the theory of a random product of matrices over L. Okay, but it doesn't work directly. It cannot work directly because there is no measure theory. So P1 of L is a space which is complete because the norm is complete now, but which is very big. It is not locally compact, for instance. Okay, so it is not well adapted to measure theory because we want to repeat the Fürstenberg argument in this field. And so actually we embed it in a larger space, which is called the Berkovich space. So the analytification of L, so this is called the analytification of P1L, which was invented by Berkovich, which is a larger space, which has better topological properties. And so roughly, this space, P1, this Berkovich space, is a space of balls in L, in P1L. It is the space of balls in P1L. So balls for the spherical metric. So on P1 of L, on L you have a norm. So on P1L you have a spherical metric. Okay, and the Berkovich space is the space of balls in this P1. So what does it look like? Well, it is a tree. It is a real tree. And why is it the case? Why is it the case? Well, look at the unit ball in L. What is this unit ball? It is a set of power series, okay, of Laurent series. So it is the set of Laurent series such that the valuation is positive. So it is actually the set of all formal power series. Okay, so this is the set of all formal power series. Okay, so which have distance at most 1 to 0. Then what happens when you start decreasing the radius? So now you have this ball of radius 1. You start decreasing the radius, what happens? Well, as it was remarked, the norm has discrete values. For some times, nothing happens. So as soon as the norm of the series T is exponential minus 1. So until the norm reaches exponential minus 1, nothing happens. So when it is equal to this one, when R is bigger than exponential minus 1. And then when you reach exponential minus 1, something happens. Okay, you reach the first series of order 1. So there is a branching here. So this is a space of balls. So so actually these two balls are considered as different. Okay, so it is the space of balls, but the radius is important in a way, in a sense. So as balls, they are not the same. They are the same as sets in L. Okay, so when you reach radius exponential minus 1, something happens. You have plenty of different balls now, because 2 points at distance E minus 1 are E inverse are series which coincide up to order 1. Okay, so here you have a branching. You have branching, and how many branches do you have? You have as many branches as the number of possible first coefficients. Okay, and you can repeat. Okay, so here you have a sea of branches, and you can repeat. When you reach E minus 2, you branch again. So nothing happens until exponential minus 2, and then you branch again. Okay? And now, what is the set of power series itself? It is the ends of the tree. Okay? So you have a certain tree here, which goes to infinity, and at the end here, you have individual power series. Well, you have individual formal power series. Okay? So that's roughly the structure of this set. So it's a tree which is very big. It's a tree which is, so this is the unit ball. So actually the P1 has a similar structure. You have a tree structure, so with a sea of, so the center point somehow is the unit ball, and you have branching everywhere. Not everywhere, but you have plenty of branches at a certain set of points. Okay, and at infinity, you have the classical points. Classical points in P1 of L. So classical power series. Okay, so it turns out, and so I see that my time is over, so I will not be going much further. It turns out that there is a topology on a real tree which makes it compact all the time. Okay? When you have an R tree, as complicated as you want, there is a certain topology where the open sets are the complements of finite sets. Okay? So by definition, you can declare that the complement of a finite set here is an open set. And it defines a certain topology. Okay? So you have to be slightly more precise than that, but that's the idea. And with this topology, you get a compact set. Okay? The space that you get is compact. And so you can do measure theory on it, because you have the notion of a radon measure, which is well defined. And with this, so maybe if you don't mind, I will just state one result. We can redo the Fürstenberg theory. So the theorem is like that. So actually this discussion is valid not only for the field of power series, but for every field which is non-Archimedean and complete. Okay, so let me state a theorem. Let me state a theorem. You take every valued field, so a field with an absolute value, which is complete and non-Archimedean. Complete and non-Archimedean. And you take, oh, I should have said before one word. So SL2 of L acts on Berkovich space. So of course, this construction is essentially functorial. So we know that SL2 acts on the boundary because these boundary points are the classical points, but it also has an action in the middle. Okay? And this action is continuous. So it acts continuously on this Berkovich space. So I take gamma, a subgroup of SL2L, SL2K, which with a measure mu satisfying B1 and B2, satisfying B1 and B2, and which is non-elementary, so there's a way of defining what it means. It's exactly what I said for SL2M before. Then there exists a unique stationary probability measure on this space. So there exists a unique stationary measure, stationary probability on this Berkovich space. Okay, so you can do exactly the same as in the classical case, and which gives full mass to the boundary points, which gives full mass to classical points. Okay, so you have a certain, of course I know that I'm going too fast. So you have a certain random dynamical system here, okay? A random way of acting on this space by Möbius transformations. And it has a unique stationary measure exactly as in the complex case. And that's the first statement. And second statement, positivity of the Lyapunov exponent. So 1 over n, so almost surely, the limit of 1 over n log norm of the elements of, okay, excuse me, here I took a subgroup of SL2K. I should have said a morphism from G into SL2K. Okay, is the same of rho of G n G1. So that's the Lyapunov exponent associated with the situation. It is a positive number. Okay, so we have this general theorem about random walk on this Berkovich space, on this one-dimensional Berkovich space. And then this is not the end of the story, because now we have to find a way of kind of a transfer principle which allows us, so that's the easiest part of the story in a sense, because now we have to understand why this allows us to study the asymptotic properties of the classical representations now. Okay, so the end of the argument, so I will not be able to say too much. So how much time do I have? It's finished, right? Where's the chief? Chief is here.
You have 15.
15 minutes? Okay, I can explain you a few things. Okay, so it's not over. So that's the first result. first result is a completely non-Archimedean. You study the Furstenberg theorem on an arbitrary field. Okay? So we will apply it to the field L. So it is not completely new. I should say something. I should say something here. There's a result by Maher and Chioso, who have studied random walks on isometry spaces of Gromov hyperbolic, of a non-compact Gromov hyperbolic space, and their result implies number 2 here. So, so they have another proof, a previous proof. Of the positivity of the Lyapunov exponent in a context which contains this one. Because we are here, what we are doing random walks on a tree which is not locally compact. Okay? Which is not locally compact for the tree topology, but which is locally compact, which is compact for the other topology. So what is delicate here? So since I have some time, I can tell it. So the proof is basically the same as in the classical case, but you need to pay attention to the subtleties of the topology. So you play with different topologies, and when you look at the proof of Furstenberg, some statements are true in the metric topology, some statements are true in the tree topology, and some statements are true in the Berkovich topology. And you have to interpolate between these and understand how it works. Okay? Still, there is this result by Maher and Chioso which implies the second part of the statement. Okay, so now how to get back to the complex numbers. So now we need a kind of transfer principle which allows to transform this statement into a statement on asymptotic properties of complex representations. So we want to get back to a complex representations. Okay, and so for this I need to do a little bit of algebraic geometry. So you know what the point blow-up is? Okay, so first a preliminary. What is a point blow-up in a complex surface? So you give yourself a surface, a complex surface, let me call it X, and a blow-up is a certain surgery which allows to replace a point by the set of directions at this point. So formally it is defined as a mapping from another complex surface, okay, which is a biholomorphism outside the spatial point, but which replace the spatial point by a curve like this, and the directions at this point correspond to points along that curve. Okay? So you can do it in a complex way and get a certain complex manifold where this point has been replaced. So locally, I mean, you can imagine that this is C2. So locally, the space of directions at the origin is P1. Okay, so you have replaced this point here by a P1. Okay? And of course, you can play again. You can take a point here and blow it up again. Then you get this, so this is called an exceptional divisor. And you get a new exceptional divisor, which is the blow-up. So maybe I should use colors. So that's a brown point. And there's a brown exceptional divisor. And so if you take now generic curves here, you get curves which are smooth here at the origin, and all these curves here, they correspond to one point of the blow-up, so they are all tangent to a certain direction when you you go back downstairs. Okay? So now, what is a model of X? So remember, X is D cross P1. And the whole story will be about, so let me make a picture. So remember, we have D cross P1, and the disk at P1. And we have, we have a certain subgroup of SL2M, which is the image of arrow group gamma by rho. Okay, so it is a set of transformations which depend on T. So they act as biholomorphism outside the central fiber. Okay, so we have a group of biholomorphism acting on D star cross P1. And now it is very useful in such a situation to be able to, so I have said that most of these transformations, they shrink everything to a point or they blow up a point to everything. Okay? So it is very useful to be able to zoom at that point to understand what happens. And what does it mean to zoom in complex geometry? It means to blow up the point, like this. Okay? So a model of X is just a composition of blow-up, a composition of point blow-ups, above the central fiber, above X naught. Okay, so that's very classical in complex algebraic geometry. Okay, so it means that you replace your central fiber by a certain family of divisors like that. Maybe you have something like this. Okay, but outside you haven't changed anything. So outside you have your P1s like this, but when you go to 0, you converge to some complicated object where you have blown up different points. Okay, so that's a model, and so so let me call it Y. It has a certain central fiber, which is now much more complicated than this one. Okay, and but outside the central fiber, it is the same manifold. You have a biholomorphism. So on each of these P1s, you have the classical holomorphic dynamical systems acting, and we have to understand what happens when you go to the central fiber here, which is and it is useful. Let me claim that it is useful to be able to understand what happens also here to analyze the situation there. Okay, and let me state a theorem here. So the most precise form of the theorem. So remember there was but it's still here, so I don't need to state it again. No, it's not the good theorem. Sorry. So theorem. So under my assumptions, on every model Y, so here I have the stationary measure νt on X. I can put it back to a stationary measure νt on Y, because it's just a biholomorphism. And what I say is that on every such model, this family of measures converge to something, some atomic measure on the central fiber. There exists a measure νy on νy naught on the central fiber of Y, such that νt, so actually it's the pullback of νt, so a model is just pi from Y to X, converges to this measure νy naught on the central fiber. Okay, so this convergence to the measured atomic measure on the central fiber, it is true on every model, and it is atomic. This measure is atomic here. And this is actually the main point of the proof of the continuity of the Lyapunov exponent, because you see, the continuity of the Lyapunov exponent is based on the same idea as in the classical case. It is based on the continuity of the Fürstenberg formula. Okay? In the classical case, in the classical non-elementary case, you look at the Fürstenberg formula and you analyze what happens when the parameter converges to the origin. The stationary measure converges to something, and you have a nice formula for the Lyapunov exponent. Okay? If I am able to prove that the stationary measure converges to something on P1, this thing could be just a single point. So you don't have much information to analyze what the Fürstenberg formula says at the limit. But being able to zoom at arbitrary point and arbitrary depth gives you enough information to analyze exactly what happens for the Fürstenberg formula on every model. So we have to consider all these models at the same time. Sorry, it's a little complicated to understand, but just if you must remember something, you should remember that we have to analyze how the stationary measures converge in every model to be able to analyze sufficiently precisely the Fürstenberg formula to get the asymptotic of the Lyapunov exponent. Okay? And just so the last thing I want to say is, so how do you analyze this? And the point is that there is a certain dictionary between models and points in Berkovich space. So let me say it here. So we will use this, of course. And so to analyze what happens on models, we use a certain dictionary between Berkovich space and models. Okay, so the tool. There is a dictionary between models on one side and the Berkovich space P and of the field L. So now we have to work with this field of a power series. So what is this dictionary? You see, if you take a component here, so a model is given, the color is not nice. Look at this component here. Okay, a certain component of the central fiber in Y. And take a family of curves, of generic curves, transverse to this component. When you push this back to the original P1, you get a family of curves which are tangent to a certain order, right? So these curves which are tangent to a certain order, it is an equivalence class of formal power series. Okay? So it is somehow a ball in the space of power series. So associated to this, which is the so-called generic point of this fiber, you have a ball in the space of power series, so you have a point in Berkovich space. So actually the dictionary is like that. Here you have the Berkovich space. If you give yourself a model, so actually it means you give yourself a certain set of components like that. To every such component, you can associate a point in Berkovich space. So you have a certain graph associated to it. So the graph will be something like that. In my case, let me add a third component. You have a third point like this. Okay. So to every model, you associate a finite set. So to every model Y, you can associate a finite set S in Berkovich space. And in this dictionary, the point in the set, they correspond to components of the Y naught and closed points. So this is called, in algebraic geometry, it is called the generic point. So that's the generic point of this component here. And to a closed point here corresponds a connected component of the complement of the finite set S. So two points in Y naught. So let me say it like this. So the dictionary is like a component of Y naught corresponds to a point in Berkovich space. And to a point of Y naught corresponds a connected component. So you get the set of components, you get some points, so you get a set S, a connected component of Berkovich space minus S. This is normal because if you blow up this point again, you will get a new component. So you get a new point in Berkovich space, which will be located here. Okay? So it's not completely, well, it's quite natural if you think about it. Okay, so now I said that by the theorem that was written here, the Fürstenberg theorem in the non-Archimedean case, there is a certain stationary measure on this space which is supported at infinity, which gives full mass at infinity. So given my non-Archimedean measure nu here, I have a non-Archimedean measure nu Na, non-Archimedean, which gives full mass to infinity. So it gives no mass to the orange points, but it gives some mass to the connected components. So I can consider for every, for every C connected component of P1 analytified minus S, I can consider the mass of this component for the non-Archimedean measure. And so I can push the non-Archimedean here by a map which is called the residue map on Y, which will give an atomic measure, which will give a certain atomic measure, which is supported on maybe an infinite set, which is the set corresponding to the set of connected components with positive mass for the non-Archimedean measure. Okay? So here I get a measure, say, nu y, and nu y of a point is equal to nu Na of the connected component corresponding to the point. That's the definition of the measure on the model Y. And these measures, they satisfy certain functorial properties with respect to the action of SL2L and with respect to taking further blow-ups. So the data of this non-Archimedean measure gives you a certain atomic measure on every model. And of course, this atomic measure is precisely the residual measure of the non-Archimedean measure here. Okay? So to say it differently, and that will be the last word, the non-Archimedean measure on the Berkovich space is the data of atomic measures on all the possible models which satisfy certain functorial properties. Okay? And from here, we are able to describe in this precise model how the group acts. So for instance, if you take a certain transformation, if I take, let's say, a generic transformation gamma, so by the non-Archimedean Fürstenberg theorem, if you take a generic word, you will get a hyperbolic element of this space with a very big translation length. So meaning that a generic element in the group will be a kind of translation in the tree with a very large translation length and with an attracting fixed point here and a repelling fixed point here. So that's how gamma will act. Okay? And now you can read how the corresponding element gamma will act on Y. You will have, so this point here is contained in a certain connected component. And the other one is contained in some other connected component. So you will have, so let me use the green here and the brown here. You have points on this model corresponding to the green component. So that's the green component and the brown component here. And you know that on this finite model, the element gamma which you view at this stage, on this model, it will act by mapping everything to the brown point. So that's the action of gamma on Y. And the action of gamma inverse on Y maps everything to the, that's the opposite, gamma and gamma inverse. So you can analyze the action of an element at a given model just by looking at the action on the Berkovich space. And you can do this on all the models at the same time. And from this, you get this convergence here. So this is the way you get this. And then you get the asymptotic of the Lyapunov exponent by analyzing how the Fürstenberg formula degenerates in every model again. Okay, so now I'm stopping here.
Any question or comments?
Just one quick question. You are supposing that the functions are meromorphic. So if you multiply by some t on some power, you could make the norm to be bounded.
Okay.
Above.
So
Then when you go some matrix.
So you cannot just multiply by power because we are working in SL2.
Yeah, but you go out of SL2 in that case. So the idea is that when with some normalization you converge to some matrix that is not invertible.
Yes.
The Lyapunov exponent, you think that is continuous in that sense? That for that, so you can define the Lyapunov exponent even for non-invertible matrices. There are some results.
Yes, you're right.
You think that your result implies in some way like a continuity in that way? That converges implies some continuity?
So in the classical case, you can always come back to SL2 by just factoring what it needs to have determinant 1.
Yeah.
And I think it's the same here. Because when it's just elementary, I mean, you just take all your matrices in GL2, you factor the T to the power, and you will get something like that. You will get a product of matrices. So imagine you have matrices in GL2, GL2 of M, and you write it at T to the alpha times gamma T tilde, and this one is in SL2. And when you take the product, you will get something like T alpha 1 plus alpha n times gamma T tilde 1, gamma tilde gamma n. So the Lyapunov exponent, here you have a classical sum of random variables, and you have the exponent, Lyapunov exponent for SL2. So sorry, yes, it works the same for GL2, exactly as in the classical case. Does it answer the question?
Yeah, but so the question is that what you prove is that you converge with 1 over log to some number.
Yes.
And this is related to the Lyapunov exponent of the limit matrix.
Yes, I think so. Good. That's a good point. So, okay, but the limit matrix may be constant. So the action, so you see, in the example I gave, it was something like 0, I don't know, t over t plus 1 and t plus 1 over t, and something with a t square here. Okay, say 1 over t square. Okay, when you factor the biggest term, what you get is 1 over t square times something, and here you have 1, and then you will have 0 at the limit. Okay, so it's not invertible anymore, and I think you lose the information at the limit. You see what I mean? So actually, if you do this, you don't have any more a random walk on a group, because the matrices that you have are not invertible.
Yeah, but you can define the
yes.
exponent having some infinity, like one of the exponents could be minus infinity. But I just asking if
I think that if you do this, you lose the information.
okay.
I have to write it down to be sure, but I think you lose the information.